Functional rig training, rig exercises, rig accessories module, bands. We'll look at resistance cord exercises to begin with, including runs, crawls, jumps, lunges, rows, rotations, and presses. Here we have forward runs. So you're going to attach the resistance cord with a rear attachment, maybe using the shoulder or the belt harness. And we're performing forward runs, so you want to maintain some tension on the band throughout. You're going to be going out about 3 meters or so. Again, just to reiterate the key safety aspects, you don't want to overstretch the resistance cord, because just like elastic band, it can break, which will cause injury. So in this case, forward runs are mostly associated with trying to teach a little quick acceleration, so to overcome inertia and start you getting moving enough. Now this can be adapted into a pop-up to run, so very good for athletes that need to get off the ground quickly and then accelerate forward. So that could be football, rugby, MMA fighters, and a variety of other sports. So we're going to start in a prone position, facing downwards. You're going to pop up onto your feet, and then without hesitation, accelerate forward those first 2-3 meters. Control the run backwards, back down, face down onto the ground, and repeat. So it's very much a metabolic exercise. So you're going to get a lot of cardiorespiratory overload with this exercise variation. Now this can lateral runs, obviously going to be training us to move in the frontal plane a little bit more. So again, trying to maintain tension on the band, the cord throughout. We're going to be going laterally, sidestepping, again 2 to 3 meters. So again, this is good for sports that required lateral movement, so tennis, football, again rugby, hockey, cricket. Quite a few sports require you to Now, a slight variation to the lateral run that we saw a minute ago is the step over. So with the kind of inside leg, you're going to step over and across. So it's somewhat counter-intuitive to kind of move with that leg first, but it is a skill used in order to try to teach athletes how to move efficiently laterally to the side. Or it's another technique that we can choose to teach athletes how to move laterally efficiently and smoothly. Backwards runs, somewhat self-explanatory. We're going to be facing the anchor point. Now the shoulder harness doesn't work with this, so you're going to need a belt or a vest attachment. You're facing the anchor, and then again it's a quick few steps backwards, walking back to the start position, and repeat. Slight variation of the forwards runs. We can do multi-directional runs. In this case, we're seeing it with a little floor tap. So we're kind of going forwards and then at an angle about 30 degrees or so, just with a little tap on the floor each time. Again, you just need to make sure you got enough space so that there is no restriction. Bear crawls, we're going to position ourselves facing away from the anchor on our hands and feet, and we're trying to effectively crawl forward, keeping a relatively low position, but you want it to be quite smooth and efficient. Different people have slightly different ways of performing bear crawls. This we kind of do with our knees quite bent, trying to keep ourselves not extremely low, but in a relatively low position. Other variations of exercises, we can do horizontal or broad jumps. So facing away from the anchor, it's a big 2-footed jump to try to move as far horizontally as we can. A little walk or little hops, steps backwards. We can also do lunges. So again, facing away from the anchor, using a belt or shoulder harness, and we're doing forwards and then reverse lunges to get back to the start position. So effectively it's resisted walking lunges, both forwards and backwards. Now we can kind of have this attachment set low or high, in this case. And then if we want to attach the handle or multiple handles, we can do a variety of other kind of standard cable type exercises. So here we see kind of horizontal rows. So obviously with a higher elbow, going to be working predominantly the kind of upper back, the retractors in between the scapula, and also the biceps. Facing away, we could do a kind of opposing movement like a horizontal press. In this case, it's kind of angled slightly upwards. So we're going to be working a little bit of chest, anterior deltoid, triceps. And again, this could be performed two-handed. We've taken both ends of the resistance band, so we're just doing it one arm at a time. So you're going to get a little bit more rotation at the core and rotation control that you need to stabilize as you're pressing forward with one hand. We can also perform rotations. So in this case, we have horizontal rotations. So you want to keep your arms, you can have a slight bend in the elbow, but keep the arms relatively straight. And we're focusing on simple torso rotation. As you can see with the hips, you can get a little bit of hip movement. So it doesn't all have to come just from the torso. But you want to reduce the work done by the arms. So no bending and straightening of the elbows. Then we can also perform the wood chop, so effectively a downward angled rotation exercise. Now whether we allow the foot to pivot as we see here or keeping the foot flat, that's kind of your choice. Two different slightly different styles of performing the same exercise. So the horizontal rotation, this downward rotation, 2 out of the 3 movements in order to completely train the rotation movement pattern. Reverse wood chop will work the upward diagonal rotation pattern. So this kind of complements the horizontal rotation and standard wood chop exercise. So again, it's a rotation movement. In this case, we're just going to be utilizing a little bit more of the kind of shoulders and upper back as we lift that handle up diagonally across. Some nice little variations. Here we can see the same kind of reverse wood chop being performed in a split kneeling position. So that upward rotation is the same, but we can change the body position. So you saw standing a minute ago. See, we have split kneeling, so one foot up and then on the other knee of the rear leg. We could also do this in a double kneeling position or a seated position. But the split kneeling helps us to kind of effectively just put the pelvis in a slightly different position than when we're standing, and it helps us to get a more comprehensive training of the core musculature because we're just putting it in a slightly different position. Now we can also perform the press in this split kneeling position. So as we see here, pressing straight upwards. So we're going to find, like in this type of exercise, in this split kneeling position, you're going to get more lateral core overload. And so you have to kind of work those core muscles a little bit harder just to stabilize yourself in the frontal plane when you're in this position. And there are lots of other variations we can perform, even a lot of stand exercises. Here we see a kneeling tricep extension, just kind of facing away. Obviously, a variety of different retractions and shoulder, upper back, bicep, tricep exercises can be performed with these bands. Pretty much, if you can perform them on a cable machine, then you can probably perform them using a resistance band or resistance cord. So key things with the resistance cord: critically, do not overstretch. You want to ensure that the anchor is secure, and use the shoulder harness for forward-facing exercises, and you can use a belt or a vest for any lateral or backward drills, because the shoulder harness isn't going to work. Power band exercises, we'll just show you a few of these. So just go through some crunch variations, some pull throughs, and some assisted mobilization to give you a few ideas of how you could use this piece of equipment. So we could attach the power band to one of the high anchor points on the frame and performing this kind of standing crunch. So you're holding the band with both arms, keeping that slight elbow bend, and we're producing the force simply by flexing the torso. So it's going to be very much an anterior core, a little bit of hip flexor activation as well, and the upper body is just going to be used isometrically to hold the band as you flex at the torso. Now this could also be performed in a kneeling position. And again, these bands are slightly different than if we were using a cable machine. Obviously this is progressive resistance, so there's minimal resistance at the start position, and as you flex at the torso and at the hips, and the band becomes stretched, and the tension and therefore the intensity. We could also perform this exercise in a split kneeling position. So again, as we saw with the resistance cord, power band, again, some of these exercises we can just tweak the position. Down on one knee at the back, the front foot is up, and we're again performing that same flexion movement. So the exercise in itself and the muscles we're using are the same, we're just tweaking around the body position. Kneeling, split kneeling, or standing, all very good variations of pretty much the same exercise. And then if we want to kick in a little bit more on the obliques, we can take hold of the band with one hand, and effectively we're doing more of a kind of lateral crunch. So a bit of flexion, but it's more of a kind of diagonal or lateral flexion. So we will work a little bit of the anterior core, but mostly we're going to be trying to hit the obliques in this case. Other exercises where we can perform pull through. So this is it's like a lift pattern movement. So we're going to be working hamstrings and glutes. Take hold of the band with two hands, step forward. So you're reaching your hand back in between the legs, so attached to the base in a low position. So it's minimal resistance at the start. And then as we come up into an extended, hip extended position, as you come up to standing, then the intensity, the resistance is going to increase as the band becomes more taut. So this is going to be working hamstrings and glutes, but unlike like a Romanian deadlift, you actually have very minimal loading in that bottom or left position and more loading at the top position. And we can also perform exercises or assisted mobilization, and so effectively we use the power band almost like a bit of a traction technique. So we tend to kind of get into a similar kind of stretch position, and then we use the band to almost allow that tension on the band to kind of pull at the limb to create more of a traction force. So here we see an assisted lat mobilization, so same kind of position that we would do a lat stretch, but the power band is actually pulling and sucking the arm forward, helping to increase the mobilization of this particular exercise. Now we can use this pull for doing things like TFL, or tensor fasciae lata mobilization. So here we're kind of performing almost like a windmill type movement, but as we go down, and just even in the starting position, the band in this case is pulling the hip and the femur laterally against the hip, which will help to stretch that TFL. We then just drop into a windmill position, which will further help to stretch the TFL by elongating the. And then one of my favourite ones, hamstring mobilization. So we attach the power band towards the top of the femur, the top of the thigh. We adopt this standard hamstring stretch position. But as we are getting into this hamstring stretch position, the band is effectively trying to suck the femur posteriorly against the socket, and that just further helps to increase the stretch. We can add a little bit of movement forwards and backwards, side to side, so adding a little bit of lateral, sagittal or transverse plane mobilization to that standard stretch. So the power bands, they're good for heavier, smaller range of motion core exercises. One of the big plus points with the power bands is they can also be used for assisted mobilization work. So they're a very good piece of equipment if you can have those and show people how to use those effectively with the rig. So on the review, presentations, make sure you watch your presentations for this module. For the guided learning practice, complete the guided learning practice for this module, details of which are on the learner management system. Practice the exercise yourself so you're happy with the techniques, and then also practice coaching the exercises to a colleague so you can look to get across the key information. You then want to also complete the guided learning submission for this module. And then the review questions. Make sure you complete the review questions for this module to ensure you've met the learning outcomes.